For months, Ukraine has been begging its allies for a green light to strike Russian soil with Western-supplied long-range weapons. On November 17, 2024, that green light finally came. And Ukraine didn't waste a second. A barrage of missiles flew toward Russia's territory in the following days, but none of them hit the invader as hard as the UK supplied Storm Shadow missiles. These missiles, launched on November 20th, absolutely decimated the enemy, even taking out senior officials, and Russia doesn't have many left. Ukraine's message was crystal clear: no one is safe. No one and nowhere. Not in occupied Ukraine, not even in the heart of Russia. Stay with us as we have all the details of this devastating strike in this video. Let's start with the background to help you understand why the Storm Shadow missile strike is such a huge deal. The UK first supplied Storm Shadow missiles to Ukraine in May 2023. However, this first batch of missiles came with a condition. They weren't to be used to attack Russian territory. They were supposed to only be used to defend Ukraine's territory against Russian forces. Naturally, Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky protested this condition. He claimed that the only way for Ukraine to win was to hit military targets on Russian soil that were orchestrating attacks against his country. However, the UK wasn't the only country to impose these limitations. All of Ukraine's Western allies did so, including the United States. The first loosening of the restrictions came in May 2024, following the onset of Russia's long-anticipated summer offensive. Ukraine was now allowed to strike targets inside Russia, and only military facilities used to launch attacks into Ukraine. This was good news for Ukraine, but still not enough. If we want to win, if we want to prevail, if we want to save our country and to defend it, we need to lift all limitations, Zelensky pleaded. Finally, in November 2024, his pleas were heard. The US, which is the single largest donor of military aid to Ukraine at over $60 billion, authorized Ukraine to fire American-supplied long-range missiles at targets inside Russia. Other key Western allies quickly followed suit, including the governments of the UK and France. This move begs the question, why now? Are Zelensky's pleas truly what prevailed, or is there something more strategic at play? The answer leads toward the second option. You see, the authorization from the US came after two major events. The first was the reported deployment of North Korean troops in Russia's Kursk region. This deployment marked a major escalation in the Russo-Ukrainian war, as it was the first time foreign troops were officially sent to bolster Russia's failing war effort. Some 11,000 North Korean soldiers have reportedly been transported across Siberia to Kursk, following orders from the country's supreme leader Kim Jong-un to aid Putin. Alongside them are several North Korean generals, artillery, and BM-21 Grad multiple rocket launchers. These troops were initially believed to be infantry only, but intelligence now shows that North Korean elite troops might be involved, making their presence even more alarming. Most of the troops are still preparing for combat, which will become important later on in the video. They're currently training with Russia's naval infantry and the Russian Airborne Forces (VDV), specifically the 155th Naval Infantry Brigade and the 11th and 83rd VDV brigades. These same units are already active in combat operations in Kursk, and many of the North Korean troops are expected to join them on the front lines soon. This puts Ukraine November 20th strike into perspective, as the facility targeted reportedly hosted numerous North Korean soldiers at the time. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. For now, let's break down the second event that might have prompted President Joe Biden to finally give the long-awaited green light: President Donald Trump's re-election on November 5, 2024. You see, Trump has already stated his intention to end the war in Ukraine, but he didn't elaborate on how. What he did do was criticize the billions of dollars in aid sent to Ukraine under Biden, which immediately raised concerns in Kyiv among Ukraine's allies. Trump's skepticism about continued military support has left many wondering if his administration would scale back or even cut off the aid that's been crucial to Ukraine's defense. This uncertainty has spurred both Ukraine and Russia into action. Kyiv knows it must solidify its position while it can still count on unwavering Western support. Meanwhile, Moscow likely sees Trump's return as an opportunity to push for peace talks from a position of strength, which explains the urgency of taking back Kursk. The uncertainty over Trump's moves likely pushed Biden to greenlight long-range strikes into Russia, allowing Ukraine to inflict maximum damage on Russian forces and infrastructure while it still can. With any luck, Ukraine could seriously reshape the battlefield before Trump's inauguration on January 20th, 2025. And Storm Shadow missiles will surely be part of these efforts. With this in mind, let's get to know these missiles a little better before discussing their first monumental deployment inside Russia. Storm Shadow is an Anglo-French long-range cruise missile designed to strike high-value, stationary targets deep behind enemy lines. How deep? Try at 155 miles away. That's how deep. This impressive range allows Ukraine to strike critical Russian infrastructure, even in the heart of Russia itself. The Storm Shadow missiles are launched from military aircraft and fly at nearly the speed of sound, Mach 0.95, hugging the terrain to avoid detection before diving to strike its target with devastating force. The avoiding detection part is also one of the Storm Shadow's most notable features. Even the most sophisticated air defense systems are no match for this missile, which likely explains why Ukraine was able to land multiple Storm Shadows on Russian territory. Remember, Russia has always presented its air defense systems as nearly impenetrable. From the latest S-500 systems to a variety of layered defensive measures, Moscow has poured billions into securing its skies. And yet, here we are. Storm Shadow has proven highly effective at evading Russian defenses due to the missile's advanced guidance system, which combines GPS, inertial navigation, infrared imaging, and terrain referencing. This highly specialized weapon has been used against Russia on a few occasions, making it nothing short of a nightmare for the Russian troops. In September 2023, 3 of the 10 Storm Shadow missiles hit Sevastopol's Black Sea fleet port, delivering a massive blow to Russia's naval power. The missiles tore into the Rostov-na-Donu submarine and the Rapucha-class landing ship Minsk, seriously crippling Russia's fleet. The damage was so severe that reports claimed Minsk was beyond repair. According to Ukraine, this attack also killed 62 Russian personnel, many of whom were aboard Minsk, as the ship was scheduled to depart for combat duty a day later. Another devastating blow to Russia's military came less than 10 days later, when at least 3 Storm Shadows hit the Black Sea Fleet headquarters, killing 34 Russian officers and wounding at least another 100 personnel. The fatalities included some of Russia's top brass. Of course, this was no coincidence, as Ukraine purposefully targeted a meeting of the Russian Navy's leadership in Sevastopol. There were even claims that the commander of the Black Sea Fleet at the time, Viktor Sokolov, was among the victims. However, there are still conflicting reports on whether Sokolov was actually killed in the strike or not. If he was, he wouldn't be the first high-ranking Russian to be taken out by Storm Shadows. In June 2023, a Storm Shadow missile played a pivotal role in eliminating Major General Sergei Gerachev, the chief of staff of Russia's 35th Combined Arms Army. This brings us to the most devastating Storm Shadow strike, which also claimed the life of a Russian general. The November 20th strike this video is all about. Now, before we break down this strike, keep one thing in mind. This attack is still fairly fresh, which translates to a whirlwind of conflicting reports surrounding it. But even though the fog of war is still thick, we'll do our best to piece together the most credible accounts for you. It doesn't help that Ukraine has been pretty vague about the specifics, with senior military sources only labeling the strike as very successful. This is pretty much on par with Zelensky's comments made after the US allowed deep strikes into Russia's territory. The Ukrainian president did say that the missiles would speak for themselves. As for us, we'll rely on multiple reports to fill in the blanks. Let's start with the target of the November 20th attack. The target of the strike was reportedly a high-value fortified command post, exactly the kind of facility that Storm Shadow missiles are designed to annihilate. You see, this missile is crafted to penetrate hardened bunkers and underground military structures and devastate them with an 880-pound warhead. This makes it ideal for targeting the command centers and ammo depots Russia has relied on throughout the conflict, and that's exactly what happened on November 20th. According to multiple sources, including a Russian blogger, the missile struck a key command post in the Kursk region. The exact target of the attack was likely an underground military facility located in Marino, a town historically tied to Tsarist Russia, some 25 miles from the border with Ukraine. According to the reports, this facility, the Russian Presidential Affairs Directorate, was used as a command center for the North Korean forces in Russia. These forces were part of the 50,000 troops ordered to reclaim Kursk by attacking the Ukrainian-held 250 square mile salient in the region. As mentioned, the timing of the permission to target Russian soil was no coincidence. The same goes for the choice of the target. A Ukrainian official even hinted that this strike was part of a broader series of operations targeting North Korean positions in the Kursk region, which had been scattered across the area. This particular hit, however, appears to be the most significant one, as it strikes at the heart of the North Korean operations in the region. So it shouldn't be surprising that Ukraine went all out on this strike. It wasn't just a single Storm Shadow missile. It was a coordinated attack in tandem with drones and rockets meant to confuse and overwhelm enemy defenses. So how many Storm Shadows are we talking about? The numbers vary, but the most widely reported figure is 10 Storm Shadow missiles. This is no small number considering that each missile costs at least $1 million and is only used for high-value targets. According to the Two Majors Telegram channel, a prominent pro-Russian channel, as many as 12 Storm Shadows were launched into the Kursk region. The channel even posted images of missile debris with the name Storm Shadow clearly visible. Adding to the confusion were reports from some Russian war correspondents that they heard at least 14 explosions, many of which were preceded by the distinct sound of incoming missiles. Videos from Telegram show black smoke rising above a residential area, confirming the severity of the attack. But how was this attack carried out? Some reports suggest the strike may have involved a record 5 Ukrainian Su-24 bombers, each armed with 2 Storm Shadows. These bombers were reportedly modified by Ukrainian forces, with foreign assistance, to launch the British Storm Shadows and their French counterparts, Scalp EGs. This time, the bombers alone reportedly carried 10 Storm Shadow missiles, with possibly more launched from other platforms. The Kremlin made no comment on the exact number of Storm Shadows launched, but it did claim that the Russian air defenses shot down 2. And that's not all. According to Russia's Ministry of Defense, 6 HIMARS and 67 unmanned aerial vehicles were also neutralized by the country's air defense systems. Even if this is the case, it's obvious that the Russian forces failed to prevent the main event, the event that reportedly took out several military personnel in the process. Many experts theorize that this was precisely the reason for that attack. Similar to the September 2023 Storm Shadow strike, a gathering of senior command staff was the actual target, but this time the Russian officers were joined by North Korean military personnel. Let's tally up the damage. First, the North Korean troops. Sources are inconsistent, but it's widely reported that around 500 North Korean soldiers were killed in the strike. If 11,000 North Korean troops truly arrived in Russia, this means that the Storm Shadows took out almost 5% of them. But the soldiers weren't the only ones affected by this attack. As mentioned, the true target was the higher-ranking officials. Allegedly, a senior North Korean general was injured in the November 20 strike. The Wall Street Journal cited Western officials who confirmed the general's injury, though details about his condition remain scarce. The same applies to the identity of this general. Although his name hasn't been officially disclosed, there are speculations that it might have been Colonel General Kim Jong-bok, who was sent to oversee the North Korean Special Forces units deployed in Russia. Regardless of who the senior official was, Ukraine made one thing clear: no North Korean personnel supporting Russia will be spared. As the US National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby has put it, all North Korean troops are fair game and fair targets for Ukrainian troops, regardless of their rank. As for the Russians, at least 18 soldiers were reportedly killed in the attack, while another 33 personnel were wounded. Among the dead were not just rank-and-file soldiers, but key officers from the southern and eastern military districts, territories closely tied to the Russian war effort in Ukraine. But the real tragedy for Russians, of course, was the reported death of Lieutenant General Valery Solodchuk, the commander of the 36th Combined Arms Army. Reports from multiple sources indicate that Solodchuk was among those killed in the strike, though his death hasn't been definitively confirmed. For now, it was believed that he was definitely at the headquarters at the time of the missile strike. But who even is Valery Solodchuk? Well, his background paints a chilling portrait of his involvement in Russia's aggressive military campaigns. Born in 1971, Solodchuk had a long career steeped in bloodshed and controversy. He played a direct role in the Battle of Kyiv at the start of Russia's invasion in February 2022, leading his forces from Belarus to attempt an encirclement of the Ukrainian capital. The operation was a catastrophic failure, with the Russian 36th Army repelled by Ukrainian forces. His leadership during this operation earned him little more than contempt from his subordinates, as evidenced by an audio recording from May 2022 where Solodchuk was heard threatening to kill his own soldiers after they refused his orders to attack. Clearly, his idea of leadership was more about intimidation than inspiration. However, Solodchuk's involvement in Ukraine stretches back even further. His participation in the 2014-15 invasion of Ukraine, particularly in the Donbass region, is well documented. His actions during this period are widely regarded as part of Russia's war crimes during the early stages of the conflict, with many alleging that his forces were directly involved in human rights abuses against civilians. At the time, Solodchuk commanded the 7th Air Assault Division, which was responsible for the deployment of Russian troops and artillery in eastern Ukraine. His subsequent promotion to lieutenant general was tied directly to his participation in Ukraine's occupation, cementing his legacy as a central figure in the Russian military's war of aggression. This makes Solodchuk's loss no small matter for the Russian command structure. By taking out a symbol of Russia's brutal, unprovoked aggression, Ukraine let the world know that Russia's most notorious war criminals are no longer immune to justice. And that's precisely what this attack was: justice, rather than an execution of the defenseless, as one Russian blogger absurdly put it. Russian statements on the matter didn't mention Solodchuk. In fact, Putin claimed that no commanders were even injured in the strike. Putin's exact words were, "The command and operational staff of the control center suffered no casualties." Putin added that this staff continues to manage effectively the operations of Russian forces to eliminate and push enemy units out of the Kursk region. However, Putin did confirm that there were casualties in the attack. In his words, the attack and subsequent air defense battle resulted in casualties, both fatalities and injuries, among the perimeter security units and servicing staff. But as you might expect, in reality, Putin didn't take this devastating strike quite so lightly. His response came quickly and forcefully. Almost immediately after the Ukrainian strike, Putin claimed that Russian forces delivered a counterstrike targeting Ukraine's defense industry. This is hardly surprising, as Russia has frequently targeted Ukraine's industrial heartland in Dnipro and other areas as part of its strategy to cripple Ukraine's ability to fight back. But Putin wasn't done yet. In a highly publicized move, Putin announced the introduction of a new medium-range hypersonic missile, the Oreshnik. Putin said that the tests of the missile were successful, further elaborating on how it would be a game-changer for Russia. Supposedly, the Oreshnik can hit targets with unmatched speed, traveling at Mach 10, or around 7,000 miles per hour. According to Putin, none of the air defense systems currently available in the world is powerful enough to intercept such a weapon. As if that wasn't enough, Putin also issued a barrage of threats. Staying true to his usual ways, Putin also included nuclear retaliation in these threats. He changed Russia's nuclear doctrine to make it possible for Russia to target military facilities in countries that allow Ukraine to strike Russian territory. He specifically referenced the UK and the US, suggesting that their use of long-range missiles in Ukraine could provoke an aggressive response from Russia. Of course, this is by no means surprising, as Putin has long made it clear he considered the use of Western-supplied long-range weapons an escalation of the conflict. After the November 20th strike, he once again reiterated his stance that the West was the one to instigate the war in Ukraine, and it's the one keeping it alive. You see, according to Putin, there's no way Ukrainian forces could use the Storm Shadow missiles independently. Experts are well aware, he proclaimed, that the use of such weapons is not possible without the direct involvement of military experts from the manufacturing nations. Here, Putin was, of course, not so subtly, alluding to the idea that the West is directly involved in the conflict by enabling Ukraine's strikes deep into Russian territory. This is the same tired line Putin has used to justify his invasion of Ukraine in the first place, blaming the West for everything from his aggression to the sanctions he's facing. It's a scapegoating tactic that he's used time and time again to rally the Russian populace and deflect blame from the invasion's failures. Now, Putin's threats might sound intimidating, but there's a fatal flaw in his approach. These threats are mostly empty. Western officials have consistently downplayed Russia's nuclear saber-rattling, with CIA Director Bill Burns even calling Putin a bully who will continue to saber-rattle from time to time. Despite his threats, Ukraine continues to receive Western support, both militarily and economically. The UK has made it abundantly clear that its support for Ukraine won't be deterred by Putin's irresponsible rhetoric, as the country's defense minister called it. In fact, the UK has recently boosted Kyiv's arsenal of Storm Shadows. According to a Bloomberg report, dozens of Storm Shadows have already been delivered to Ukraine, marking the first major arms transfer under the UK's new Prime Minister Keir Starmer. The country has also pledged to deliver more. And that's precisely what Ukraine needs for a true impact on the battlefield. More long-range missiles, more Storm Shadows. But can Storm Shadows alone make a difference? The short answer is no. While the Storm Shadow missiles are incredibly effective, they can't single-handedly change the war's trajectory, especially when you consider the fact that Moscow hadn't been idle either. Before the permission to use these missiles even came, Russia had already adjusted its position. Bombers, missiles, and critical infrastructure have been relocated deeper into Russian territory, placing them beyond Storm Shadow's range. So while Ukraine now has the capability to strike up to 225 Russian bases identified by analysts as within range, the impact may be limited by Moscow's countermeasures. Even so, Storm Shadows still have immense strategic benefits. They force the Russian military to operate from greater distances, increasing their logistical costs and reducing the efficiency of air support and command operations. Additionally, the challenge of defending such a vast territory stretches Russian air defenses thin, creating vulnerabilities that Ukraine's drones and other munitions can exploit. This added complexity severely disrupts Russia's ability to manage its war effort. With this in mind, where do you think Ukraine will strike next? Also, will the British Storm Shadows and the American ATACMS missiles continue leading the charge, or will they be joined by other advanced long-range missiles? Will the German Taurus missiles, which the country's Chancellor Olaf Scholz has previously vehemently refused to send, suddenly become available? Also, do you see Russia striking back harder than it already has? Share all your predictions and theories in the comments section below.